Today's episode of Venture Capital is brought to you by Mozy Pro, protect your data, protect your business, and by Fenwick and West.
You're going to want to tune in today. Our guest is Eric Ries, who is the founder of the Lean Startup Movement. Tune in.
There is no stopping an idea whose time has come. But the best entrepreneurs don't stand still with an idea. They get to the business of getting things done. So step forward with your idea, and when you're ready, sit down and tell me how you want to change the world. This week in Venture Capital.
Welcome to This Week in Venture Capital. You're in for a treat today. My guest, Eric Ries. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Happy to have you on the show. Normally, you're used to talking in front of big crowds, talking about the Lean Startup Movement. I want to go back before the Lean Startup. I want to understand what makes you tick that helped you develop a lot of these concepts. You went to Yale?
Yep.
And did you study computer science there?
I did.
Okay. And where are you from before Yale?
I grew up in San Diego.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Where in San Diego?
I grew up in Mission Hills.
I know it well.
You know well, so there you go.
I went to UC San Diego, so.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I lived there for 5 years. I should say I lived there for 4, but I was on the 5-year plan.
I took 5 years to graduate myself.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so you studied comp sci, you went to Yale, and you came out and did what?
Well, you got to go back to before I came out because I was in school during the dot-com bubble.
Oh, you were?
And so at that time, it seemed like what everybody was doing, if you had the tiniest bit of technical acumen at all, you were starting companies. And so I actually took time off for my degree to do my first company during the dot-com bubble.
Yeah, it sort of felt like you were a loser if you finished school back then, didn't it?
Yeah, it was like there was just this totally alternate reality that set in that feels eerily familiar.
I was just going to ask you. It feels like that exact
It's so weird. The proliferation of incubators. I mean, I was in New Haven, Connecticut.
Yes.
Okay, and I had half a startup under my belt and like almost a CS degree, and I was on the advisory board. I remember well of 2 incubators and a venture fund. Now my new heuristic is when the bubble gets to New Haven, it's probably towards the end.
That's your J.P. Morgan shoe shining
exactly
moment.
right. It's like very nervous. It was such a mess.
It's a tough topic to talk about, Eric, because I try to talk about it in a positive, constructive way. And every time I do, as a venture capitalist, I'm either seen as having a vested interest or bias or being too negative. But the signs are there, which are incubators popping up. And for those who don't know, throughout the 90s, there were incubators everywhere. People are feeling the pressure to start now and leave school, which was the exact same as it was in the late 90s. And I will tell you one thing that's unique about me as a VC, in terms of the canary in the coal mine, is I'm seeing the corporates, like the people with MBAs and running strategy at big companies now all wanting to come do startups. And the thing I love about down markets, I mean, I don't love that it's bad for everyone, but like the real entrepreneurs come out because you almost become an entrepreneur because you can't do anything else. Like this is, right?
It's the thing you want to do, yeah. Yeah, look, it was a total mess for me in the last bubble. I mean, we didn't know the first thing about how to build a great product, a great company. We didn't understand what entrepreneurship was. All we knew about it, we knew from the movies and from reading magazines. Did you drop out,
or did you do it at the same time?
I was actually lucky that the company failed soon enough that I could do it during a leave of absence.
Okay.
And go back to school. And I was only, I still graduated, just a year late.
What was that first company doing?
We had a pretty good idea. Check this out. Our idea was that college students from elite universities should create online profiles for the purpose of sharing. Doesn't that sound good?
Hey,
it's not the worst idea ever heard, right?
Not, it's not. But my favorite saying is being too early is the same as being wrong, right?
It's 100%. And in fact, to be fair, we had the idea that they should use those profiles to help get a job for like resume recruiting for big companies.
Okay.
So if we thought that was the path to a real business because we'd be making money, we'd sell a product to companies, help them. I mean, seemed like good business principles. So if someone had pitched us Facebook at that time, we would have been like, no, we want to use our technology for a real business, not a stupid social network.
Exactly.
So we were truly, utterly clueless about what makes a great company.
And you went from there to actually do, after you graduated, do a startup. Did you go to Silicon Valley? Did you do it back east?
No, I was, when the dot-com bubble burst, we were toast and was a total, complete failure, zero success. And so my thinking was go to Silicon Valley, the world headquarters for entrepreneurship is how it felt at the time, and apprentice myself to the best entrepreneurs I could find. And I joined a company as employee number 20 maybe that was like your classic Silicon Valley company. I mean, in the end, 5 years of stealth R&D, $40 or $50 million raised. Oh. I think we had 200 employees by the time we launched the product. So you can kind of, you already know where it's going.
Origins of where Lean Startup came from.
It's not a huge stretch to say that was the anti-pattern for everything that happened next. Just because what was so funny to me at the time, I was completely convinced that company was going to be successful.
Yeah.
Everyone involved was super premium.
What were they doing?
It was a virtual world product, like a Second Life competitor. So it should have been a huge success.
Yeah.
Very cool idea, amazing technology, smartest people I've ever seen, and actually pretty impressive product vision.
Okay.
And yet, the failure of that company was almost indistinguishable from the failure of my first company.
Okay.
It was just 2 orders of magnitude more expensive.
Yeah.
So it was really I was sitting there, front row seat, being like, wait a minute, I keep doing everything right, and I keep getting these horrible outcomes.
Why did it take so long to ship that product? Was there a sense that it needed to be perfect before they shipped? Was it a lack of concrete vision of what they were building? What was it?
The vision was almost too concrete. I mean, we'd all read the same sci-fi novels, and we knew exactly what we needed to build. Yeah, I would say that the core mistake was we wanted to build a product for mainstream customers. We used to say we were trying to build the next AOL back when that was still cool.
Yeah.
Or the next Microsoft, right?
Now
when that was so cool. Right, yeah, exactly. So we thought it would be naive to build a product that would only be used by niche early adopters. We wanted to build something that was ready for prime time. That was a big part of it. And so that was just the ultimate license for scope creep, because once you've let that giant batch of the pressure of how much you're going to launch all at once grow, then it's like, well, hold on, we could launch today, or we could delay a little bit more and make it a little bit more perfect. And since you've got everything riding on this one big launch, you feel like, well, we've only got one swing, why not delay a little bit? And in lean manufacturing circles, they call it the large batch death spiral.
Okay.
Because that can eventually hit a critical mass where you can't launch anymore, because there's always economic to seem like, it's always like, well, let's just delay a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Who really wants to be the person who rushed the thing out prematurely? And
was this like 01, 02, or was it earlier than that?
This was, let's see, I joined in 01, I think, and the company's actual launch was in 03. So I was, it had already been going for some time, even when I showed up. And
you were an engineer there?
Yeah, I was an engineer. I think my business card said senior software engineer. I mean, it was.
And was it software that was intended to be shipped via? Was it a web-based product? Was it going to be shrink-wrapped and so?
We were right on the cusp of the transition from shrink-wrap to web. So I remember being in the meetings trying to figure out if we should deliver on a CD or download, and we ultimately eventually went the download route. So that was actually quite radical at the time. Of course, it was 100 meg download
on dial-up networks.
Yeah, in a time when dial-up was still more prevalent. I mean, a ton of just. What's interesting is that there's so many proximate causes of the failure.
Yeah.
If you look at the specific things that went wrong at the launch, immediately afterwards, the wipeout, all the stuff that went wrong, you could be like, well, that was a mistake, that was a mistake. And the challenge, certainly for me, I spent a lot of time thinking about this in the years after, is working backwards to figure out what was the root cause of the failure.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of, like when something like that blows up, there's so much blame to go around. We had way over, too much architecture, not the right. We didn't have the agility as an engineering organization to adapt to what customers were actually doing.
Right.
But that's because we really thought we knew what customers wanted.
What was
because
the root cause?
So I think at the root cause is that we had an incredibly good business plan.
Right.
And we believed that the business plan was true.
Okay.
Instead of being a guess.
So it means that you had too much certitude. And you drank your Kool-Aid a bit?
Well, not a bit, gallons of it. So we would do plenty of focus groups.
Yeah.
Focus groups always told us we were on the right track, everything seemed perfect. And my favorite part is, most business plans, they got that nice hockey stick shaped graph, of how much revenue you're going to have.
Yeah.
And what people always forget, the most important part of the hockey stick is that long flat part.
Yeah.
So here we are rolling along in the long flat part, and we're like, everything's on track.
Right.
The bad business plan is brilliant. We're getting just, we're having a pathetically small number of customers, just like it says. And I remember being like, what? We're T-minus 30 days from the, from the elbow. We can't wait. Of course, sometimes you stay on the flat part forever.
And what was it specifically about that product that you think never made it take off?
I think that it actually was a really good product.
Okay.
And it actually had a very passionate early adopter community that rallied around it. In fact, I just got an email randomly today from someone who remembers from all the way back then how awesome that product was and how far ahead of its time it was. And so,
what was the name of it?
Was that? I don't like to speak ill of the dead,
okay.
So I'd rather not get into it. But it really was. This is a real story. People will look it up. But I mean, we as a company and based on the way that we had raised money, based on the business plan, based on the expectations we had created in the press, we couldn't sustain the business on a passionate early adopter core.
One of the things, Eric, that I talk to about a lot of companies is being careful to not overhype your PR before the product's ready. And I want to use an exact example, which has been my favorite whipping boy lately, which is color.
I knew what you were going to say. Yeah.
But here's the thing, Eric, is the idea of implicit photography, meaning we're in the same proximate place, we take photos, we haven't decided to link them up, but because we're geographically connected, we can share photos, is actually quite a good idea in my mind. Mm-hmm. The execution of it, version 1, probably not terrible. But what seemed to be the problem to me is they raised expectations so high that when it failed to live up to that hype that you saw, then the whole market just wanted to get rid of it. And I feel like there was a sense that you had to be first and you had to be big and you had to be loud. And I just don't believe in any of that. And the interesting thing is I think they made 3 big mistakes if I could go to root cause. Yep. They raised too much money. And I think not having that constraint forces a lot of mistakes. Number 2, I think four problems. 2 is they had too many founders. I think too many chiefs, not enough Indians is a problem. I don't know if that's politically incorrect. I don't mean it to be. Number 3 is this idea of the kind of hype curve that you really can't live up to.
Yep.
And 4th is they gave up too fast. Because I actually think it's a good idea. And I just can't understand how they pivoted away from it.
I mean, this is a really problematic thing. Color's a great example because when they launched, I got a lot of phone calls.
Yeah.
Because people were like, "Oh, isn't that the anti-lean startup? Do you want to comment on it?" And people called me to say, "Isn't it a problem that they have this ridiculously grandiose vision that they raise so much money?" And I always said, "Listen, none of those things are a problem from my point of view.
Yeah.
Maybe their vision could be right for all I know.
Yeah.
Raising a lot of money to pursue an audaciously difficult technical challenge, no complaint. The only complaint is that you're calling me right now." Nobody should ever have heard of this company because they should be figuring out these answers in private so they can fail in a way that's not so embarrassing. They don't face the pressure to do this. And what was so interesting is one of the journalists I talked to said, "That's interesting you say that because I was just there and meeting with them and I asked them about why did you generate so much hype, and they swore to me up and down that they didn't mean to. They gave a few interviews, they didn't think it would get out of hand, blah, blah, blah." And it was interesting. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe they're just saying that now that they're embarrassed.
Doesn't seem to be true.
But let's say that it was true. To me, even that is like such a great example of why you got to have a little theory to figure out what to do. Because people are very naturally inclined to say, well, sure, we're not going overboard. Let's just everything in moderation. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Not too much design, not too little, not too big, not too small. Middle. But actually, when something's really lethal, a little bit of it is actually lethal. Yeah. And so my point is, like, in a situation like that, why would you ever talk to even one journalist? Why would you do even the tiniest bit of PR? Every ounce of energy in a startup is precious. Yeah. Why would you waste it on something that's counterproductive?
Scarcest resource in any startup is management bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I say companies are way more defined by what they don't do than what they do. Now, that implies that you have to do some good stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You can't just be shit and do nothing and be great, right? But if you've got the core of a good idea, curtailing it. So I'll just give you quick examples, Eric.
Yeah.
People go way too fast to internationalize because they find someone in the Philippines that's willing to license their product. Or people say, well, we could just build this services revenue because this enterprise client is willing to pay us for it. Or we could just expand the scope of the product. Or I could just hire 3 more. We could just do one more thing is what kills companies.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Part of what I talk about in Lean Startup is that I believe the vital function of a startup is to learn how to build a sustainable business.
Yeah.
And that sounds pretty good on the surface. People are always like, yeah, who's not for learning, right? That sounds good. But there's some pretty creepy corollaries if you really believe in that, because it means that your goal is not to get big fast. In fact, if getting big could get in the way of learning, it's a mistake. And there's a ton of stuff that seems like it would, like, what could be the harm? Getting a little press, winning an industry award, going international, adding an API, or being an enterprise customer, all those things you named, like, they all seem fine until you ask, wait a minute, what are we going to learn from that exercise? Is that going to help us figure out how to build a sustainable business? If the answer is no, you got to say no.
Well, you know, I've had this conversation. I mean, it's funny because as a startup and as a VC, you actually have to live in reality, you know, rather than theory. So you've been there yourself. So I'll give an example of a company. I hope they won't mind. It's called Awe.sm, AWE.sm, which is an awesome company. And what the company does is it helps businesses, e-commerce or publishers, media companies, better create social media campaigns that enable them to track not only upstream conversion but bottom of funnel. Right? So that's kind of essentially what they do. And the premise is that Bitly in itself doesn't enable that. You get a single unique URL out of Bitly. Google Analytics doesn't actually track it very well, so you need a new tool, a new approach.
End-to-end.
But we had limited resources. And what I started discovering over time was we had this UI where you could see the dashboard and analytics of everything. And then we built this great platform, this corpus of data that was really complicated to build that we were giving to partners who were then packaging it up in their own UI. And because we had scarce resources, eventually I said to the team, you can't do both of these because your UI is not good enough, in my opinion. You're having this great platform business, but to do the UI, you're diverting resources. So I feel like what I said to the team, we need to pick, we need to nail one of them. When we nail that and then we get more capital and we have enough customers, then we can nail the other.
Yeah.
But these are the trade-off decisions you really have to make.
And you don't want to make them because they're painful and scary. But actually, here's the thing I think that people really don't understand. This is actually just this application of the scientific method. You know, if you can't do science if you don't have a hypothesis. And the same way, you can't do entrepreneurship if you don't have a vision. So when I talk about lean startup, we're all about making entrepreneurship more scientific. That people sometimes think, oh, you're trying to turn it into a crank. You know, just turn a crank, make it a spreadsheet, make it formulaic. Like, hell no. In fact, someone said, you know, we can't turn entrepreneurship into a science. If it was a science, that anybody could do it. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that science is a science, and very few people are able to do it. So I'm not too worried about that. But having a vision, a strong vision, actually allows you to make these decisions. If you think about them as hypotheses in a much better way. Because what happens is, you know, if I was like, hey, I want to do a science experiment, I'm going to do 2 half experiments, you'd be like, what? You're not going to learn anything that way, right? Better to do one good, solid, strong experiment, and then if it fails, then do the second one. But by the time you do the second one, you'll have learned more, you'll know what you're talking about.
What it seems to me, having dealt with this issue again and again with a lot of startups, is it's people are hedging. And it's scary to say, well, if I do all this stuff and it doesn't work, then I'm screwed. So I'm going to do a little bit of this, I'm going to do a little bit of that, and whichever ends up succeeding more, I'll put more wood behind it. But the problem is then you end up sub-optimizing both, and neither of them, you know, end up being that great.
If you're really serious about this, you really have to change the milestones by which we hold entrepreneurs accountable. The hedging comes from unwillingness to fail, because you feel like if you have any kind of failure or mistake, that undermines the momentum that you have to keep going. You know, you need momentum. You need everyone to believe. So most entrepreneurs are constantly selling. You know, every VC meeting, everything's up and to the right, everything's great. You know, give us more money, give us more. It's all great, great. Everything's great, 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 until it explodes one day, and you're like, gosh, the day before it exploded, you said it was great. Surely there was some sign, right? No, it just always hit the wall full speed. So if we can change the conversation, and this is what I really believe in. If we can change the conversation from are we on track, are we executing the plan, to what are we learning, we can create what I call learning milestones, where we can actually celebrate failure if it's a productive, strategic failure that gives us key learning that we need. And when we do that, the hedging strategy starts to seem insane. You'd be like, well, why would you ever do that? You would delay getting to that learning milestone.
One of the things that you said that really resonates with me and that I think could be a teachable moment for entrepreneurs, and the thing is, Eric, is that it sounds so basic, but it's having a hypothesis. Hypothesis. And what I find is when businesses present to me, often if I say to them, but what is it you actually do better? What is it you're doing different? What is it you want to achieve? Even some people say to me, Eric, I have to show you. You can't explain it.
Yeah.
And I say, if you have to show me, then there's nothing there.
Right.
Right? Like, I feel like you ought to have a simple proposition that you can explain in really simple terms what it is you do. And that often when people have to be too complicated or have to show or have to be long-winded, it's because they don't have a discrete hypothesis.
That's right. And if you don't have a discrete hypothesis, you are incapable of failing. Because most of these people that are having this problem come to me, and their plan basically is ship it and see what happens.
Yeah.
I say, if that's your plan,
yeah.
guaranteed to succeed at seeing what happens.
Yeah.
Something is guaranteed to happen. And then you go to those board meetings, and every month you go into Google Analytics, you look for whatever chart is up and to the right, and that's the most important chart this month. And you bring that to them. It's like it's not. That's actually pseudoscience. It's
so
astrology.
I went to Stanford and I spoke at Stanford, and I said that in my opinion, most Silicon Valley firms are lazy. And of course, that's controversial to say. And by lazy, I don't define lazy as they don't work hard, because I know they work crazy hours, right? And everybody's unhealthy. Lazy and maybe this is it, maybe it's defining the hypothesis, is I believe that your starting point as a business ought to say there's a problem. There's something that just I don't think works well. And here's what I think we could do about it. And if we did this, here's how we imagine making money.
Yep.
And I always said, like, I don't want to see a business plan in the sense of an 80-page a Word document. I like to see people who know how to use Excel. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I don't even care about complicated modeling even. I don't want your 5-year projection. I don't want to know if you know what gross margins in year 3 are going to be.
Yeah.
But some basic assumptions of what is the unit of what we think people are going to buy? What is the price by which people would pay for that? How does that compare relative to existing products in the market? And I think those things become part of your hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good hypothesis is a quantitative hypothesis that shows not just that customers want this thing, but that if customers behave the way we say they do, there's a good business to be had there.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the book is spent on this thing, I call it innovation accounting, because it needs a name, which is how do you build these models so that you're not wasting a lot of time on traditional business planning, but we're also focusing on the metrics that actually matter for the business that we're in.
But so that we can talk about your book, about your book. Which, by the way, I, as you know, bought a significant number of copies, and I hand out because I think your writing, you and Steve Blank, when you guys write stuff, I find it resonates so much with me and my experiences. And I feel like, especially when you wrote about testing and A/B testing or whatever, that stuff every entrepreneur needs to read.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the book is called The Lean Startup. It came out, gosh, about 2 months ago now, and I've basically been on the road.
How is it done? There's a copy of it up there.
Good, yes. No, it has done super well. It debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, it's really been good.
That's phenomenal.
So I'm personally proud of it, but to me, the accomplishment is not so much mine, but the fact that there's this whole movement of people who have been driving these ideas into the mainstream consciousness of entrepreneurs, investors, and now including like private equity guys, CFOs, like really getting the word out, and it's their victory as much as mine.
So I want to peel back the onion on a couple of your ideas, because every time I've read your stuff, I just find myself nodding my head. Hearing you speak, I always find myself nodding my head, and yet a couple terms that you use, I'm not sure. So let's see where we stand.
Let's get right to it.
The lean startup, okay? You've said that you have no problem with firms raising a lot of money.
Yep.
I believe that firms ought to start raising small amounts of money, and I'm going to do a carve out for if you're solving some huge technical challenge that really truly is some scientific breakthrough that requires 18 people to work for,
You working on teleportation?
Yeah,
understood.
Exactly.
Always understood.
But for the normal startup, if I'll call it that, the normal tech, internet-based type startup, I would assert that if you raise too much money, it leads to a lot of bad behavior, like trying to build too many features, like hiring people too fast. So my mentor is actually my partner, Yves Sisteron, who works at GRP. And he told me in 1999, when I raised my first venture capital, he said, I raised $16.5 million A round. And he said to me, Mark, we really like you. We like the concept. We're going to invest. I just want to tell you one thing. I think you should raise less money. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, you're going to raise too much money, you're going to hire people a little bit too quickly, you're going to build a little bit too fast, things aren't really going to work how you expect them to be, and there's going to be a lot of waste. And when you come for the next round, if we're in an up market, great for you. If we're in a down market, it's going to come out of your pocket, right? And I think he was articulating the lean startup, right? And almost to a T, I made every mistake. I built 4 products at the same time, 4.
Oh, man.
I launched in 5 countries simultaneously. Now, I was in Europe at the time, so that's a bit easier. That's like launching in Texas and Florida. But I made every mistake. But do you really believe that you shouldn't constrain capital?
Oh, not at all. No, the issues that you're talking about are completely real. But I try to stay neutral in the VC wars as much as possible because I think that fundraising strategy should really be subsidiary to your overall business strategy.
Right.
And that there are different situations that call for different approaches to fundraising, depending on what kind of business you're in, as you point out, hard science versus internet versus whatever. And the fundamental goal should be to eliminate waste.
Okay.
So anything that prevents waste is good. Anything that causes waste. And I think the biggest waste that startups encounter is they're building the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They're sometimes doing it very efficiently,
right.
but it's the wrong thing. So we want to efficiently get to the point of figuring out. And so some, especially first-time entrepreneurs, the increased discipline of constrained resources is especially important. And so, if that is what you need in order to drive the waste out of your process, I'm fine for that. As a theoretical matter, you shouldn't have to be in a capital constrained situation to act in a disciplined way.
Right.
So, just as a theoretical matter, I'm officially neutral about it. Now, as a practical matter, unless you know the specific date when the bubble is going to burst, and you think it's relatively soon, I think too much capital is generally it's a big problem.
So we're aligned.
We're totally aligned.
We're aligned.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I told you about $40 million down the drain. Like it gets expensive quickly if you don't have an alternate mechanism for enforcing that discipline.
And another term that I've taken issue with, not the concept, but the term, is fail fast.
Yeah.
And my problem, Eric, is the way I've described it is fail fast, I think, is about launching and learning, launch a product, see what people think, figure out the bits, tweak the bits that aren't working, aren't resonate, pull them out of your product, enhance or embellish the product. But I believe that the term fail fast, like the people who weren't there when you wrote the memo and had the discussion, have taken on their own definition for what fail fast means. So I run into entrepreneurs all the time who say, well, we launched it, it was 200K, who cares? It didn't work, I'm moving on to my next company. Yeah. And they say, and I said, but you can't do that, you took money. They say, yeah, but we're failing fast.
Yeah. No, the thing that people are confused about is like the thing which is meant to fail is not your company, but your idea. Your bad idea is meant to be proven invalid as quickly as possible so that you can get on to being successful. And so people who are cavalier with their investors' money, who don't realize the incredibly negative reputational effects that has. Not to mention that oftentimes when your idea fails is the most important opportunity.
It's when you learn.
To see, like, we're on the path to success. If you look at Facebook and Groupon and saying all these companies, there's this like pretty embarrassing failure right before the huge success. And you can easily imagine someone being like, failed fast, move on.
Yeah.
So we call it pivoting, not failing, because it's this very funny thing. You're not stubbornly persevering the plane straight into the ground, but you're also not giving up and going home. You're keeping some element of what you were doing before, but changing one other thing at a time. And it's a very complicated thing to describe, although the great entrepreneurs seem to do it naturally.
How do you describe the tension between pivoting and traveling?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know? Because I think people give up on ideas too easily.
Too soon,
Like, when do you know? How do you know, Eric, when it's just a hurdle versus this is fundamentally not working?
So first of all, the definition. A pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision.
Okay.
So people who are like, I got a new vision today from yesterday, like, that's already a violation.
Sticky bits to turntable.fm is not a pivot in your mind?
I don't know. See, I never comment on other people's pivots.
Okay.
Precisely because
like you're on camera.
No,
because
from the outside, you could be like, well, the point to Groupon, that's not a pivot. But if you go talk to the guys who were there, what was in their mind at the time, there's actually a very clear pivot point that they're pivoting around, this idea of collective action.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just a reset.
I heard Andrew describe it. He was basically saying they had all these different platforms that were using their collective action platform. And the one they cared about the least was Groupon to make money, because they weren't. This was about activism, and they saw this one trending up despite their plans, and they went to investors and said, "We're thinking about shutting down the point, but we got this bit that's really working. Would you like us to pursue it?" Yeah. That's kind of the way he tells the story. I don't know if it's mythology.
Yeah, I mean who knows? But the thing I do know is that the very first Groupon that they did was, let's see if I get this right, 2-for-1 pizza in the pizza restaurant in the lobby of their building. Actually, I've actually eaten there. It's not bad. Yeah. I think they sold 20 Groupons. So they sold 20, basically gave away 20 free pizzas. Yep. And what I think is so interesting is that so many entrepreneurs would look at that and be like, total failure. 20 free pizzas, who cares? This is not a $1 billion business, get me out of here. But precisely because they had spent a year trying to get anybody to take any action at all, to them, 20 people was like a big deal. Like they were like, oh, it's actually really hard to get people to do stuff online. Like this is something interesting here. So it was the failure that helped them understand what they were sitting on. And I think people forget that all the time. That if you've been trying to do something, for a while, you start to develop better judgment and intuition about what it means and how it works and what the rules are, so that when something unexpectedly good happens, you're poised to take advantage of it. I think a lot of people, if they just started with Groupon as their first idea, wouldn't have been successful.
Well, I want to talk about failure now, and failure of a different kind. Failure of your file system. We have a sponsor of the show. It's called Mozy Pro. Mozy helps you to back up your files online. A lot of people are cavalier about thinking about backups. I like to call it the dental floss of the IT world, because it's something you should do and you don't actually do. But just think about the impact from your personal life if you lost all your photos that you never had again. Think about it from a professional life. If you don't have your files backed up, it could actually ruin parts of your business. So I would encourage everybody to check out Mozy, mozypro.com. And they have a cool new feature called the Mozy Data Shuttle, which allows you to back up your servers to Mozy Data Center in days. Thank you very much, Mozy Pro. So IMVU, which you call affectionately Imvu. IMVU is a chat-based product, and I think the idea, if I remember it correctly, was you could have characters, and it was going to bring things to life a little more playful. Is that an extension of like your Second Life type company, but saying let's do that same idea through chat, or how did you make the transition to that?
Well, it's actually quite different than what we were in. Although a bunch of us were involved with that first company, it was a complete reset. And the thing that we had learned, or we thought we had learned from the previous experience, was that there was something intimate about avatar-mediated communication online, that allowed you to have a more immediate sense of being in somebody else's presence that you can't get in regular text chat. But the legacy of virtual worlds and 3D games was that it's like a very big barrier for most normal people to engage.
And so having an avatar helps you.
We wanted to figure out, is there a lightweight experience that was avatar mediated?
Had you looked at QQ? Was that an inspiration?
We obviously learned about it later, but we had not heard of it. We knew that there was stuff happening in Asia with avatars. We didn't know exactly what. We eventually learned about Cyworld and QQ, which were at that time the big successes in Asia. But none of those products, from our point of view, gave you a very intimate experience. They were very cartoony, and we wanted to create something that was a little bit more realistic, not photorealistic, but just a little bit more that you felt like you really got to know the person you were chatting with.
Right.
And at that time, this is 2004, and the hot social technology at that time was instant messaging.
Right.
And our brilliant idea was to interoperate with the instant messaging networks, to basically, we called it Imvu, IMVU, to bring a 3D technology to instant messaging.
Right. So you were going to be a technology for AIM and for Yahoo's Yim or whatever.
Exactly. And I personally wrote software that would interoperate with all of those IM clients.
And how did you think you were going to make money? Because the one thing I know about IM is none of those players ever made money.
Exactly right. Our idea, we used to have this great VC pitch that said we were going to combine the large mass market appeal of instant messaging with the high revenue per user of virtual worlds and 3D games. And so we thought we would do a freemium business model, user-generated content, so that, and in fact, this part really turned out to be right. Today, if you go to Imvu, you can, I think last time I checked in, it was like 3 or 4 million products in the catalog that you can buy for your avatar with virtual currency, almost all of which are authored by the users themselves. So you could, if you have a secret desire to be a fashion designer, you can go on to Imvu right now, download tools for free, and I figured not exactly the target demographic right here. So,
so it's basically now crowdsourcing virtual goods.
Yes,
along with
that part, the economic part of the business, we were really pretty right on about.
Okay.
The instant messaging part of the business, we could not have been more wrong about. So it's classic case of having to pivot, where to make a really long story short, we found out the hard way that customers absolutely did not want to interoperate with their existing instant messaging network. That concept did make no sense to them at all.
In a new place.
And so we had to create a standalone, and we thought, at that time we said, we're creating a standalone instant messaging network, but what we eventually, of course, came to understand is, no. They want an avatar-mediated social network.
Let me ask you this about social networks. I just read the Pew research that just came out. I'm pretty sure it was Pew research about why people use social media. Overwhelmingly, surprise, surprise, to communicate with people they know and to communicate with family members. And there was this huge drop-off when it said to meet new people.
Yeah.
Do you think that's right? Do you think the norms will change over time, that social media will be a place to meet new people?
Well, that was a big part of the Imvu thesis, is that the current generation of social technologies are really about people you already know.
Yeah.
So I think if you know the social science research on social capital, it's like how many friends of friends do you have, how big is your extended network? That's like an asset that people have that makes them happy and successful in life. It's very important. So Facebook is a place you take your existing social capital and you invest it for greater returns.
Yeah.
You get closer to the friends you have, learn what they're up to. But if you don't have very much social capital, like, we used to use the example of, you're the only goth in your Midwestern high school.
Yeah.
Facebook sucks.
Yeah.
All it does is tell you what all the lame people in your community are doing who you already don't like. Right? If you have relatively low social capital, if you don't have a lot of friends, you want to make new friends, there's pretty much dating, forums, and nothing more. Our idea was, eventually we figured out that avatars are a perfect technology to help you build new kinds of social capital by connecting with people you have something common with.
This is something that I'm personally spending a lot of time on. I've been looking at a lot of social networks to meet new people and the impact that has. And they all start off and they descend into very similar things, which is sex.
Totally. And
yet we know that a lot of young, awkward people just want friendship as well. Like, how do you keep porn out of these? It's impossible, isn't it?
It's hard. Avatars help a lot.
They do.
Because avatars create a social context where just hanging out makes a lot more sense than the sexual stuff.
Okay.
And listen, people have wanted to do all kinds of weird stuff on Imvu using that technology, and we have gone through a lot of struggles as a company, to define appropriate content and partition it appropriately so that adults are with adults and teenagers. I mean, to get all that stuff right requires a tremendous amount of IP. It's actually part of Imvu's competitive advantage to figure a lot of that stuff out. But at the core, creating a non-sexualized, fun place where people can just meet people like them is a huge payoff, because right now people who want to do that on the internet have extremely poor options, and yet that's such a core social need.
I mean, I had Dimitri Shapiro on this show, who's doing AnyBeat, and that AnyBeat is a new social network. Dimitri founded Veo, if you remember Veo, the video platform, and he was the CTO at MySpace Music. And he's created AnyBeat. He's a big Burning Man guy.
Right.
And he was saying, like, I don't want to go talk about Burning Man with all my business friends on Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
I want to use Facebook.
Exactly right.
And he's like, I mean, Dimitri's a free-spirited thinker. He wants to talk about religion and politics. And I keep saying, like, I don't mind having a debate. Like, you and I might talk about racism and sexism.
Happy to, yeah.
And I would love to, I don't mind doing a little bit of that on the record, but I'd love to have a hardcore debate behind a pseudonym.
Yeah.
Only to explore my thoughts on the debate.
Exactly.
You'd only find out how you feel by having the debate. And yet, if my brand name is associated with it, then I have to worry about what it's not that I really don't care, but like I have partners, I have institutional money.
Exactly right. And I mean, I still believe in the core thesis of avatar-mediated communication for that exact reason. And it doesn't have to be the crazy 4chan style extreme anonymity.
Yeah.
I think the avatar-mediated, we used to call it personalized anonymity.
Yeah.
Right? It's not your name and where you go to school. Like from a safety point of view, it's way safer.
Right.
But it's still you. You're still customized the way you come across. You get to express your personality.
It's interesting, like when you think about Twitter, and I think Fred Wilson has that avatar. I don't know if you've seen it, where it's the caricature of his face, and the same cartoonist that did his also did Howard Lindson's and other people. And so first time I saw Howard, I was expecting him to look like his avatar because his avatar was who I knew.
Yeah, exactly.
And it created a sense of, oh, that's Howard, that funny guy with the green background.
Right.
And he's nothing like his avatar in real life. His avatar's
welcome to the internet.
It's far cooler. So how long were you at Imvu?
Let's see, about 5 years.
So you were there a long time.
It was a significant stint, and I'm very proud of the company that we built.
And you left in about 2009 then or so?
Yeah, 08, 09,
Why
something
did you
like that.
leave?
It was time.
Yeah.
There came a time, I had vowed that I was never going to be one of those founders that had to get kicked out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I'd seen that.
Stay too long.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be that way. So when I figured out that there was a difference between what I wanted from a kind of career point of view and what the company needed from a management point of view, like when that was like not even 100% aligned, I was like, oh, okay, this is a good time to transition out and do what's
next. And you had a
next.
blog called Startups Lesson Learned. You
Yep.
still do,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, it was on a crap platform. I kept thinking, when's he going to upgrade this thing?
Uh-huh.
But you just started writing for that. Did you think that you were going to go from Imvu to Eric Ries Incorporated?
No, not even remotely.
Okay.
Listen, no one is more surprised than I. You got to remember, I'm an engineer. I wrote software like since I can remember. I thought for sure I would write software my whole life because what could be more fun than that?
Yeah.
Seriously. And I had just left Imvu, and I was thinking about what's next. And Steve Blank, who was an Imvu investor, he was like, "You really should blog about some of your experiences." And at that time, it wasn't like that cool to have an entrepreneurship blog. Like in Silicon Valley, it was still considered a little bit suspect thing to do. So the only entrepreneurship bloggers were like Dave McClure, Andrew Chen. There was like nobody.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. But I kept having this weird experience where in Silicon Valley, it's a very small town, as you know.
Yeah.
I was known as a guy who had worked miracles with product development at Imvu. We were super productive. People thought I was a genius. Of course, really I had a good theory, but no one wanted to hear that. They were like, you must be a genius. So I was being asked to be an advisor to VCs, I was on a bunch of advisory boards for companies. People would call me in. I'm on vacation, remember you. But I'm like, you're such a good friend, I'll come in and talk to you. And they'd say, hey, we have these problems, blah, blah, blah. I'd say, here's how we solve that problem at Imvu. And I would start to tell them about stuff that we would now call lean startup, but no name at that time, like things like continuous deployment. We put software into production 50 times a day on average. And people would look at me like I was the biggest lunatic who'd ever walked in the door. And they would say, that'll never work. I was like, I'm just telling you a story. It works. I was there. You don't have to do it, but it works. And people couldn't wrap their mind around it.
Did agile development as a methodology influence you?
Very much, very much. And in fact, I thought when I started Imvu that I finally had an opportunity, as the head of engineering, as CTO, to make everything agile from the beginning, and that would prevent us from having any waste in product development. Of course, agile doesn't defend you against the biggest waste of all, building the wrong thing.
Right.
So I felt a little bit betrayed by agile, but it was those agile principles that once I made the realization of what we faced uniquely as entrepreneurs, the extreme uncertainty that we face. It's like, we can adapt the practices and principles from Agile to this new context, pull in some stuff from Agile, pull in some stuff from lean manufacturing, pull in some stuff from customer development, and kind of build up a methodology that's specific to entrepreneurship and to product development in entrepreneurship, from the ground up. And it was really, here's my master plan, okay, just to be totally honest. People were asking me to come in and give them advice, and they would tell me I was crazy, and we'd get into a fight. And I finally was like, listen, you called me. So don't call. So my idea was, all right, I'll put up this blog. I actually did it anonymously. I didn't put my name on it. I was so embarrassed. And I told some of these stories, and I said, listen, here's my plan. When someone asked me to come in, I said, before you ask me to come in, check this blog out. If you think I'm crazy, done, right? And way faster than I could have imagined, people started to read the blog, share it, and write me questions. Well, what about this? Sure, it works over here, but what about this thing? What about enterprise software? What about clean tech? What about biofuel? I mean, all these questions. And I didn't have enough theory to answer, and I'm kind of an analytical person, and so I started to work out, all right, if I wanted to answer those questions in a principled way, what would be required? And next thing I know,
is that where all your research went into ultimately writing the book?
Yeah, the biggest research for the book were in two areas. One, just sourcing case studies to show what it looked like in practice, because by the time I decided to write the book was 2 years later, and a lot of people were actually doing the thing. The stuff that had started off as a theory, people were doing it, and I wanted to document what was happening, good and bad, when they would do it. And then as I was writing it, I started to really get into this whole question we were talking about before about accounting and accountability. And that was really a new topic for me. I'd never thought accounting was important, but I really have come to realize that a large part of our problem as entrepreneurs is that we're using the wrong accounting systems.
Right.
And we're not measuring progress appropriately. And if we can change that, it actually makes it a lot easier to then make the process, culture, and people changes that we're always talking about wanting to make, right?
Yeah.
Be more focused. Well, guess what? Telling an entrepreneur to be more focused is like telling someone who's obese to lose weight.
Yeah.
It's like, no kidding, but
Yeah,
how? How do I
Exactly.
get exactly? So
And
that was really a big part for me of writing the book.
And I tell people all the time, you manage what you measure. I mean, it's such an obvious thing.
Right.
And an example, Eric, is I have a company that's a mobile app company that was measuring churn. And I was trying to point out to them, and I'm no genius, right? Like, I can give them the theory, but then actually implementing it's much harder. But I was saying, like, we're measuring churn, but there's multiple types of churn.
Right.
What about the people who go to the App Store, download the app, and then never use it? And the people who are like that are different
That's not
than
churn.
the people who used it 5 times. Well, we could call it bounce rate or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right.
But who used it 5 times and then stopped. The reasons those things happen might be fundamentally different, and our remedies might be fundamentally different. For example, in the former case, maybe my messaging on the website about what you should download was wrong, or maybe we shouldn't have a free product or whatever. Or maybe the customer flow, the sign-up flow is wrong, or maybe we haven't told people the value of actually using this, or maybe we need to incentivize someone to try it 5 times or whatever. And then someone who used it 5 times and stopped,
Right.
totally different problem.
Completely different problem, yeah.
And trying to break that down, and then even getting down to a granular level, which is, what I was saying is, first of all, we need to split out people using it on iOS and Android,
Yep.
right? How do they behave differently? And then on iOS, I'm like, well, we need to look at the various iterations between iOS version and network, because it could be that we're having a problem on the iOS 4 on Verizon that's causing more churn than the iOS 4 on AT&T.
Yeah. Analytics is super hard, and the problem is that you have that conversation, and it starts to really multiply out, and before you know it, you're like, oh, we got to measure 92,000 things, and that, we go back to what's our goal. Our goal is not to measure stuff. Our goal is to learn.
Right.
So measuring too many things is just as dangerous as measuring too few. In the book, I tried to articulate a theory. I've been calling them engines of growth, which is a framework for figuring out, well, what are the critical few things we absolutely have to measure?
Yeah.
And what I realized is that sustainable growth has one critical rule, which is in sustainable growth, new customers come from the actions of past customers.
Okay.
Either because through viral growth, they're being infected by past customers, or it's a retention or subscription business and the old customers are becoming the new customers coming back, or because we take the revenue from the past customers and reinvest it into advertising to acquire new customers.
Right.
Each of those 3 models is a loop. It's an engine. It turns over. The faster it turns over, the faster you'll grow. Well, in each case, there's a critical few numbers that determine how fast you'll be able to turn over, right? Viral coefficient, or how much your marginal profit per customer, or what's your retention versus churn rate. And if you're using the metrics from the wrong engine, they're irrelevant. So think about the social network. The debate about should Facebook be charging customers money or not, it's so stupid. It's like, no, this is a viral business. Viral coefficient. You would never let charging people money get in the way of the viral coefficient. That would be lethal. But if I'm in a Zynga type business where I'm buying growth from revenue, well, hold on. In that situation where viral growth is not that important, what matters is, what's my marginal profit per customer? So focusing on CPM, driving down cost to acquire a new customer is like a critical skill. And each of those engines give rise to a different set of metrics, and that becomes kind of a common accountability framework we can use. And obviously the details are in the book, but I think starting to get that metrics of sustainable growth and really getting people focused on that instead of what I call the vanity metrics of the stuff you put in your press release and read on TechCrunch, and the millions of messages sent and the other kind of nonsense that doesn't really tell you what's going on under the hood.
It's funny you say that, because I keep talking to companies about, well, I'm okay if you have vanity metrics. Like, have your vanity metrics that you give to someone else. But when we're diagnosing what's working with your business or not, your job isn't to spin me.
Yeah, we're on the same side.
We're on the same side here, right?
And employees wind up drinking the Kool-Aid because in a lot of companies, I kid you not, the employees believe what they read in TechCrunch more than what they hear from management, which is totally lethal.
It's funny that you say this. So I wrote a blog post called "Startups Are All Naked in the Mirror." And my analogy, Eric, is this, is that we wake up every day and we see ourselves naked, so we see our flaws, and we're like, and then we see everyone else in their finest clothes, and they look much better, And so you just imagine like, oh, I'm this guy who just isn't perfect, and yet I see all these people who look great.
Perfect, yeah.
And my analogy is this, is inside a company, we see all our flaws, we see what's not working, and we read their press releases.
Got it.
And so I think for company morale, it's important that you make sure your company understand that. To say that, look, we're inside the sausage factory, it doesn't look good being made, but trust me, over there, they're going through. They're wondering why things are so good in our company, right?
I always say the way you know a vanity metric, it's the thing you would put in your press release in order to make your competitors feel bad about themselves.
Yeah,
that's what it's for. That is literally what it's for. I'll give you an example. One of Imvu's competitors used to put out press releases about the total GDP of user-to-user transactions in their whole economy, as if the economy was a macro economy, like it was a country measured with GDP, and it would be these huge numbers, $40 billion, whatever. And it was like totally bogus. Like GDP, the concept doesn't really apply here. Doesn't make sense, and a lot of those interactions are just, people like, using the product, like naturally interacting with each other. Like, it doesn't really tell you how much money they're making. It doesn't give. And my CEO, my board would always come to me as CTO, and be like, "What's our GDP?"
Right.
And I'd be like, "It's totally bogus metric." And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, totally hear you, but."
What's
yours is so big, right? And it's just such a way of framing the debate in the way most helpful for you. But again, if you use the vanity metrics yourself, that's when things go horribly wrong. Because what happens is, like when I meet with startups, I often ask them a simple question: are you making progress? Every startup always says yes. Okay, great. How do you know? Very simple. Last month we shipped these cool features. This month, total hits, some numbers up into the right. So obviously, I'm like, interesting. I got an alternate theory. Let me tell you my alternate theory. I heard that last month Mercury was in retrograde. And I believe in astrology, and so when Mercury's in retrograde, obviously numbers go up. And if I'm talking to engineers, they're like, "How dare you say that astrology?" I'm like, "Well, interesting. Neither of us know why your numbers went up, but I'm just visiting, and you live here. So who's practicing astrology now? Right? You don't know. Well, there's no evidence that just because this thing happened after this thing caused it. And of course,
so it's causation.
Exactly right. And if I walk down the hall and talk to their colleagues in marketing, and I ask them a question, they're going to be like, "Oh, well, we did this great new campaign last month." Right? Everyone's got their own private explanation for what happens. When the numbers go down, what happens? Right?
It's the other guy's
fault. So everyone's like separating more and more into their own private realities, and they can't even talk to each other anymore. It's like, no wonder these things go bad, all because we're using vanity metrics. And I really believe if we change the way that we measure progress, I call them actionable metrics for lack of a better word, where we actually figure out what caused what, everyone gets a chance to learn faster because we don't waste time arguing about what caused what. We know we have the same set of facts, and so it dramatically accelerates the way startups work.
And if you can avoid blaming the other groups, of course. And I think the other thing that I remember from my first company, and I tell everyone I made every mistake in my first company, which I did, was you'd sit down with the product team and you'd say, let's go survey customers and find out what they want. So we'd get all their feedback. And then we would stack rank things. And then I said, well, every department gets to vote on a little bit of what they want in that overall feature release. And the CEO got a vote, of course. So I got my 8% or whatever that I wanted to allocate. And the problem is that product and engineering would start building stuff without including customer support or operations or sales or marketing in the discussion about what to build. And I have to admit, like, I was a little bit cynical because I'm like, well, I don't want the sales guys in that discussion because they're just going to persuade me to build what they think to get their next sale, right? But the reality is that everyone has a unique perspective, and I think getting all those perspectives in the room is important for two reasons. One is you really hear the debate from multiple people's point of view. And number two, everyone's more bought into what you actually build if they participated in the process. Otherwise, they feel like they just built it and threw it over the fence.
Yeah, I'm completely opposed to departmental silos in startups of any size. And in fact, I think there's something really ironic about that, the like siloed waterfall mentality where you're moving work from department to department. These days, every functional specialty has their own private methodology. And the methodologies are all very iterative these days. Like they're all converging on something very simple. So if I open up the engineering silo and look in there, I'm like, ooh, agile, very iterative, cool. Look over to the design open up the silo. Oh, look, there's design thinking, also iterative, hypothesis driven, right? Open up the marketing silo. Oh, everyone's doing customer development. Talking about. So it's like everyone's iterating privately, but then the whole company, the whole is like lockstep, rigid, past the work. So it's like, no, this is silly.
How do you break through that?
Blow up the silos. So first of all work should be done with small, what I call semi-autonomous, cross-functional teams.
Okay.
So if you're going to have a team that is empowered to do anything, they should actually be their own little mini startup with a clear accountability that says your job is to drive this business result, and any resources they're going to need, the representatives from those departments have to be on the team. So you got engineering and customer service and design and whoever else you need to have there together. So it's kind of like you throw them in a room and say, don't come out until this problem is solved. And you force them to learn to work together and cross-train.
And then how do I do things like set standards across all of engineering if I don't have someone who's like the chief architect who enforces standards?
Yeah, we actually at Imvu, this is great, we can get into detail about this kind of thing. We actually had 3 independent leadership trees for promotion. We were very explicit about it. There was the functional management tree, so like there was a VP of engineering and the engineering managers and engineers. We had but like those managers were responsible for performance reviews, hiring and firing. They had no say in the product at all. There was a separate tree, we call it the product leadership tree, that was made up of what we call producers and executive producers. That was completely cross-functional. No one had a business card that said producer. Anyone could play that role if they earned it. So these are the people who make product decisions at any given time. And we had a completely independent technology leadership tree for things like chief architect and people who reported up to the CTO. And every team had to have functional representation from the different departments of people, different kinds of people and beyond it, product leadership to figure out what the team should do, and a representative from the technology leadership. But again, the technology folks were only supposed to weigh in on performance, scalability, architecture in service of the product, rather than doing kind of design reviews and abstract stuff. And we'd expect that, we call them tech leads, to be on the team, working with them through the whole process. So there was never, we try to avoid handoffs. Handoffs are the kiss of death. You want people who are going to live with the work to own it as, through its entire life cycle if possible.
Makes sense. How do you deal with the trade-off between, on the one hand, customer development, and just for those who don't know the customer development methodology, let's say it's about going out, talking to customers, showing them prototypes, getting their feedback, launching a product, checking with customers, finding out what worked, checking the data, and continually refining. Let's say, if I try to draw a contrast on one side, or on the other side, the perception that one has about Steve Jobs and Apple, which is fuck the customer, they don't know what they want, otherwise they would ask for motorized buggies, and we know that they want iPads. Like, how do you rectify that?
It's a great question, and it's hard. The first step is to recognize that doing science requires you to get data about how customers behave. It does not involve asking customers what they want. Like, that's the biggest straw man ever. Visionaries are always like, if I ask customers what they want, they don't know. It's like, congratulations, that's true. But so what? Like, imagine I was a scientist and I came in here and be like, I want to do physics, but electrons won't tell me what they want, so I give up. It's like, what? No, you run experiments to see how people behave. So that's kind of thing number one. The second thing is, the Steve Jobs that everybody wants to be is the guy who launches the iPad. Up on stage with the world watching him, the guy at the peak of his career after decades of market leadership. Okay? When you're a startup, you ain't no Steve Jobs. Even if you're just as smart, even if you had all his talents, no one's ever heard of you. No, you don't have the kind of credibility to do that kind of launch, and neither did Steve. So the Steve Jobs I admire is the guy who launched the Apple I. Not on stage, a hobbyist kit parts. There's so few Apple I's in the world that they're like, there's a couple of them in museums, like they're very rare because they only sold a handful and was not a huge success. It was the first step, classic, what we would call minimum viable product, the first step towards realizing a long-term vision. So experiments allow you to start small and figure out which parts of your vision are brilliant and crazy. The third answer is, so how does Apple do it now? I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I would predict that behind the firewall at Apple, things are very iterative. The iPad that we played with, you really think it's the first version of the iPad? Hell no. And you really think there was not one customer anywhere in that process of figuring out what to do there? I find that hard to believe. But again, nobody was asking customers what they want. I think that insight that I think can be attributed to Steve Jobs is 100% right on. But that doesn't absolve us of the obligation to figure out how customers will behave in the presence of our product.
It's funny, and so I look at all these things, again, it's unsurprising to me because I love your reading and I love spending time with Steve Blank, and I always walk away feeling validated. I always tell entrepreneurs this, is like whenever they're creating products, they might talk to customers I call it a day in the life of a customer, a day in the life of, like, you really need to spend a day in the life of, you need to understand how they work, what motivates them, why they're in their job, who they report to, what their blockers are, how they make consensus, how often they use technology, what they log into. And if you can't really describe that, how the fuck can you build a product to meet their needs? And I always tell this to people, both in terms of understanding a product that you want to build, but also in terms of how you demo a product. Because I think the way you demo a product, or you talk to a VC about what you're building, is to say, let me tell you about a day in the life of a person who's a customer service representative in a company. And let me tell you what they do and what the problems are. Now let me show you how great it is with our technology and why it's going to make their life better. And honestly, Eric, and you go back to what Steve Jobs learned young in his career, everything I learned from mistakes, right?
Yep.
So I was a developer at Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. And we went and built one of the first ever object-oriented program, large-scale billing and CSR systems in the world. And what we did is we built these beautiful UIs for CSRs to use, and we knew what they wanted, right? Because we knew it's much better to drag and drop and click, because we were all starting to use Windows 3.1 and Apple computers and all stuff. No one really understood the day in the life of a CSR. And we rolled it out, and it was kind of a bomb, because these people had green screens, and they were so efficient with their hands while they're on the phone. Efficient. And here's what they did. It's like, and no one ever modeled it, right? Like, we never understood how they work, and that bit of design was a failure.
You know, and I will point out that, if you remember, the reason why Steve Jobs got fired from Apple is because the original Apple Macintosh wasn't useful.
Right.
And didn't sell. It was too expensive and didn't have any applications. And it was a beautiful launch from a PR point of view, but the product didn't deliver to the hype of the guy throwing the hammer at IBM. You know, that it took many years for it to realize that potential. So that was a situation where the PR, the press, the hype, the launch, like, was almost fatal to the company, and was really, you know, very harmful to Steve. Now, we admire him today because he learned from that mistake. And he actually had to make it a few more times.
Yes. So I'm going to do a quick advertiser break, and I'm going to then ask Eric about what comes next for him. So Fenwick and West is a law firm. In fact, they were my law firm when I had a startup. They work with a lot of startups and also with big companies. It's a national practice with huge strengths in Silicon Valley. And they've launched something interesting and new, which is called Flex. Flex.fenwick.com. And what they're really trying to do is say, there's a lot of stuff you need strategically from a law firm, where you need an expensive person who's going to help iterate and review your materials. But there's a lot of stuff that you could do more cheaply that are kind of garden variety, and you may not want to pay for resources of a top tier law firm like Fenwick and West. And that's what Flex is designed to do. So, you know, you basically get your basic day-to-day garden variety work done at cheaper prices than the strategic stuff that most law firms charge.
Cool.
So you've written a book.
Yep.
Congratulations. That's quite an achievement.
Thank you.
Something that I'd eventually like to do.
I'm looking forward to it.
If I could find the time. I've said that 2012 is the year that I'm going to start writing. What's next for you? What do you want to do next in life?
Man, I don't know. I've really stopped having to make predictions about the future, because I just keep proving so wrong. I never, ever would have imagined doing this. I mean, and my life now is like unrecognizable from a few months ago, so it's really challenging. The problems I'm focused on, you know, to me are very impactful and very interesting, which is we have this huge innovation ecosystem that is every year a more and more and more important part of our economy as a civilization. I mean, let's not forget what the stakes are here. Automated routine work is going away. It's going to be done by robots. So what are the people going to do? Well, you can look at that as a problem, that people are out of work. I see it as a huge opportunity. Think of all that untapped creativity and wisdom and innovation and, like, ingenuity of all those people that's currently going to waste. Plus, most products that are being built are failures. So, like, most people are currently, right now as we speak, working on a project that's doomed to failure. And they know it. Like, the soul-deadening, crushing weight of knowing that you're on a death march, it doesn't matter. So that is a massive problem that needs to be solved. And I think Lean Startup is a big part of the solution, and getting that to become the new default for how entrepreneurial, innovative type work is done is really important. But the problem is broader than that. I really think that the whole surrounding ecosystem of how we hold entrepreneurs accountable, how we invest in companies, how our public markets function with their relentless short-term focus, like those things all need to be fixed before this is done. So the problems are big.
I'll tell you a big problem I think you could solve.
Please.
So we know that the world's most talented software engineers are today based in Silicon Valley. Let's say the U.S.'s most talented people are based in Silicon Valley. And that attracts the best and brightest from Yale and Princeton and Harvard and Stanford and everywhere else, Caltech and MIT, who am I leaving out? The one in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, CMU.
And of course Stanford and Berkeley.
Oh, I said Stanford. I left out Berkeley, of course, Cal. And UCSD, my alma mater. Which has great engineering department. But I feel like we need to solve the problem across America. I feel like Detroit needs to get beyond auto manufacturing and become a software center. I feel like Chicago needs to get off of the financial district and the other great things and become a software center. We know that New York is trying to become more of a software center. But I think, and I've started to call it the middle class job of the next generation, is going to be software development, because so much of what we do as a society now is software based.
That's right.
And it's not about developing the next Facebook. It's about routine stuff in businesses all across America. And I feel like that's a great challenge we need to address as a society, because I feel like unemployment, which is still hovering in the high teens, if you take structural unemployment, and 25% and up in minority areas. I feel like the gap is not a lack of jobs gap. I believe the gap is a skills gap, and that's something that needs to be solved.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to downplay the macroeconomic factors that need to be done, and like we're living through a situation structurally that has, Keynesian economics and Great Depression lessons written all over it, and we were making mistakes there, and those need to be fixed. And if we fix those things, we could put a lot of people back to work. But the structural problems are real, and they're not going away. And I think you totally hit the nail on the head, that there is a new literacy that should be considered standard for our kids in the next generation. I absolutely think computer programming's got to be in there. I think entrepreneurship in general has to be on that list, because our jobs are going to be more entrepreneurial going forward. That's the new social contract is going to be, in exchange for you take responsibility for your career in a way our parents and grandparents never had to.
Of course.
In exchange, we're going to be there for you as a society with a much more modern safety net and an investment in skills and education to give you the opportunity to, if you can find, build the next great thing, to make sure you reap the rewards from that.
What I believe we need to do is get to a place where not, and this is going to sound backwards, but where not every child in America is expected to go to a 4-year university. I think that the deal that we gave Americans was go to a 4-year university and your life is better. And we're now at $1 trillion of student debt, of which $100 billion of that came last year, which is 2 times inflation adjusted what it was a decade before. And I think there's way too many 4-year colleges in America graduating people with the wrong skills and a mountain of debt, which creates indentured servants, which doesn't allow them to become entrepreneurs because they got to pay back all this debt.
But
and I'm hold on, but I just want to say I'm very pro-education, and I think it's important. I often talk about the fact that my political science degree was more valuable than my economics degree because it taught me critical thinking, and that college, the most important thing I got out of it was being president of my fraternity, which taught me leadership skills. So I'm not downplaying that, but in the old days, we had people go to trade schools to learn to be mechanics and plumbers and, work on a shop floor, of an auto factory or whatever. And I think the deal that you go and you study art history at some college in Kansas and accumulate $40,000 debt is a wrong deal. And so I'll do a small plug, is I invested in a company called Treehouse, whose objective is to try and make programming more broad, and they've split it into design and programming. If you're creative, become a designer. If you're left brain, become a programmer. And the first step is to improve people's skills at the corporate level. Second step, we want to take it right down to 13 and 14-year-olds and teach people at a young age.
I could not be more on board with that. Let's just remember that the problem here is not people being too educated, but that they're learning the wrong skills and we're financing it in the wrong way.
Exactly.
So, as long as education is a business where the universities can practice perfect price discrimination and we want to subsidize everyone's education, that's a recipe for unlimited inflation.
Yes.
But, there was a reason why we used to have world-class public universities in this country. And the idea we're allowing them to rot and decompose for lack of funding I think is an outrage.
Yeah.
Precisely because, there's certain businesses, certain marketplaces that go into dysfunction and where public provisioning of services seems to me like the most no-brainer thing in the world.
Yeah.
So, this is a complicated and difficult problem. I highly recommend, by the way, Clay Christensen of Innovator's Dilemma fame has a new book out called The Innovator's University or something like that, about using those theories to try and fix the system. I think it's really important, but I do think we got to set as our goal. I think this selfishly as someone in Silicon Valley. If we want a place like Silicon Valley to thrive, our goal should be to have as many people in America be as well educated as we can. So I think that's a very noble goal.
accept as many immigrants who are high quality.
No kidding. Talk about the ultimate no-brainer.
Yeah. I don't understand it, but politics defies me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do have to wrap up. I want to have a few big thank yous. Number one to Mozy Pro, one of our advertisers, online backup system. Remember, dental floss, you only need to floss the teeth that you want to keep. And the same thing, you only need to back up the files that you really need to have in the future. Thank you to Fenwick and West, who's been a perennial sponsor of the show. But most importantly, thank you to Eric Ries, founder of the Lean Startup and author of a book that everybody should read. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
There is no stopping an idea whose time has come. But the best entrepreneurs don't stand still with an idea. They get to the business of getting things done. So step forward with your idea, and when you're ready, sit down and tell me how you want to change the world. This week, Venture Capital.